4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Can you please give me your first and last name, spell it out for me, and your background, please?
Okay. My name is Rosanne Wood, and you spell it Rosannewood. And my background is I was a teacher and a school principal in the Leon County school system for 36 years. I was the principal at Sale High School, which I helped create as a teacher, and it became a school for the arts, pretty well-known school for the arts around the state.
Okay, then just one more thing. I just want to make sure that, because you're going to be looking at me.
Okay. You want me to look at the camera? I can look at the camera.
It just needs, they don't want you to really look at the camera, but they somewhat want you to look at the camera.
I know. You get your face
yeah,
closer to the camera.
so basically, I think this would be great. And then look at me real quick.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Okay, then.
Okay.
All right, then. So give me just a brief synopsis of, the standardized testing that's going on in Florida.
Okay. 15 years ago, when Jeb Bush was the governor here, they instituted a system called the School Accountability System, which gave schools A through F grades. And at the time, it was to get schools to really try to focus on their students' test scores, which the state of Florida did. There were some rewards involved for schools who made certain scores and also who showed improvement. It was a very effective tool in the sense that everyone really started paying attention to the rules, because there was also a little cash reward if you did well. Unfortunately, in my opinion, what happened over time is it became this panacea, like, oh, we can get the schools to do this if we add it to the school grade system. And so it sort of went from maybe a good measure to something that sort of became a hammer. And what really has become clear over the last 15 years is it is a very biased system when it comes to poverty, because the schools with the highest poverty rates are the ones who get the lowest grades. And that's not really surprising, because poverty is very correlated to education. And unfortunately, again, in my opinion, is that school grades have sort of become a negative stamp for a lot of struggling schools. Frequently, these very lowest schools with the lowest test scores, it's not because their teachers aren't doing a good job, it's because the students are walking in the door at a great disadvantage. Many of them don't speak English as a first language. Some of them come from, homes that have really tough situations. And so while there is an improvement category in the grading system, which I completely agree with, which says however your students arrive, whatever you can do with them to improve them, that's what you should be measured on. But they just couldn't quite stand that to be the only measure. If that was the only measure, I'd be all for it. But what happened is they said, well, we can't have a school where a lot of the kids can't read getting an A. So they put in a measure that says you have like 50% of the score, the kids have to be proficient. And that's much easier for an upper middle class school to have their kids who kind of generally already walk in the door proficient than it is for schools who have students who have a lot more struggles and needs. So over time, it's sort of become a realtor's tool to say, here's the school, here's the neighborhood you should move to, buy a house in. But it doesn't, in my opinion, really tell you the quality of the school. And what's really, I think, humiliating to the teachers who work there is they're working with some of the toughest students, and yet they're getting the brand of an F school or a D school. And we should be helping those schools and helping those kids and helping those teachers, and we should be rewarding people for going to those schools. But the system isn't set up that way. It doesn't reward, if it just rewarded improvement, it would be fine. But it rewards something else, and it really is much, much easier for an upper middle class school
Than lower class schools. Okay, so what do you think, how would that affect, the teachers especially at the lower end of the poll?
Well, it makes those schools uninviting to go to, because especially now that they have this new statute that says 50% of a teacher's evaluation is based on their students' test scores. Teachers know that it is harder to show good test scores for students who are impoverished and students who struggle. And so even if that was their mission and they wanted to go, they would be afraid of, well, what if my students don't perform well on the test? I'm not going to get a good evaluation. I may not get my job back. And so just less and less incentive to work with the kids who need the help the most with the very best teachers. And so that's what I've seen happen, is those schools are less desirable to be the principal of or be the teacher in, and that's a disservice to those students. The other thing is because the test score is so highly valued, especially in these schools, that they've given up lots of curriculum in order to just focus on reading scores and math scores. And while those are important, art is important too. Literature, singing, dancing, moving, communicating, working in groups, PE, those are all important things too, because schools are supposed to affect and address the whole child. And when you have such an emphasis, as we do in Florida, on test scores, then students start equating their own self-worth with their test score. And that's a very bad thing if you're 5 years old, to go into school and find out you're kind of in the yellowbird group, and your name isn't up on the board for the one who's reading all the books and so forth. And I think it reinforces the wrong message at a very early age that you're not as good as, you're less than. And now these kids have a pressure of, if they don't do well on this test, their teacher might not get a good evaluation. And that's just way too much stress and pressure to put on a child. I know here in Leon County, I'm very disappointed that they are giving A through F grades to kindergartners and first and second graders. And think about being 5 or 6 and getting an F on your report card because you didn't do well on the test. And that's how they're grading most of the grades, is they have these little work modules, and kids take these little tests on the computer, and it tells how well they did and gives them a score. And I sort of understand why the schools did it, because there's this huge pressure at the third grade. The third grade, again, under Jeb Bush's rules, accountability rules, if you don't make a passing score, or at least above a level 1 on reading, you're retained. And, I've heard a lot of statistics about retention, and that is the number one fear of young children, other than losing their parent, is to be held back. Because it's so humiliating, so shaming. And so here we are, last year, 57,000 kids were held back in the third grade in the state of Florida. That's a lot of kids that now have this sort of, scarlet letter that they hang around that they were a failure. And there's no evidence, to my knowledge, that shows retaining someone makes you catch up in the long run. The evidence that I know of is that it doubles your chance of dropping out of school for every grade that you're retained. And we know how to do things that's called looping in schools. You can let someone rise to the next level and still be remediating their skills. It's not to say you should just be passing kids on for social promotion, but those kids do need more help and more intensive help, and they should be getting it. But they need to be getting it from the best teachers, and they need to be getting it with the best principals and the best schools. And so I feel like our system is sort of convoluted to make those the schools that are kind of picked on and not looked down on, which I think is just completely wrong.
Yes, because as a student. Oh,
scratch my nose. Excuse me.
Oh no, you're fine. I'll edit it out. No, but as a student here, and like I said, I never went to school here in Florida. Mm-hmm. I mean, my question to you is, like, how do you think a parent would feel that their child failed off of a test that probably wasn't unfair, or that their child is going to a school where everybody talks about, like for my example, I'm always hearing about NIMS Middle School and Rickards High School, and I'm hearing about those type of schools that are bad and stuff like that. And it seems like kids over there, I spoke to actually a high school student at Rickards. He was like, we're not like the Lincolns or the Leons, and even Gabi was in that Rickards category. Yes. And I just want to, if I was a parent, I wouldn't feel so great.
Exactly.
And
see, those sorts of stereotypes about this school's a bad school get reinforced with this school grading. And so while the powers that be right now think it's just helping people work harder and pull themselves up and challenging them, on one hand that might be a little bit true, but the negative side to me is just so much worse. As the kids feel, I'm going to a bad school, parents feel bad about the school that they're sending their child to, and in the meantime, those are some of the hardest working teachers. You know, they've got not only to work with the academic side, but a lot of kids come with problems from home and so forth. So they're having to deal with the whole child, but being told all that matters is the test score. And, you know, if you tell schools that enough and you tell kids that enough, they will rightly just focus on tests and prep for tests all the time. And, you know, we don't really want an educated populace that comes out of school and says, you know, what are you good at? And the kid says, well, I'm good at taking tests. You know, that isn't what somebody wants as a person to work for them. They want someone who's well-rounded, who understands literature and art and can get along with people and can work in a group in a cooperative way and can do a project from start to finish. That's one of the things that's really been cut out a lot in schools, because if you do like a theme-based project in a class, which I think is where people learn the most because they get real deep into the subject, they've kind of cut those out, and field trips and things like that, where, you know, you remember that sort of learning, and sometimes you don't remember what you just read in a book and took a test on it. So I really feel in some ways we're turning out a less educated group of kids because they have equated getting a good score on a test as education. And see, that's not education. It's a good benchmark, and I do think we should have standardized tests. I'm not against standardized tests. I'm against putting the pressure on the kids and the teachers that if you don't do well on this test, you're a failure and there's something wrong with you. And I think that's really kind of what's happened. And so then people are jockeying for getting the best students to make their scores look, you know, things that educators shouldn't be thinking about. Mm-hmm. We should be thinking of every child. Okay, I'll say that again. We should just be thinking about every child, what they need to go to the next step, and not be worried about someone's going to think badly of our school because this child didn't do well on a test. And the child, not, you know, we don't want children to categorize themselves as, oh, I do well on tests, so I'm a good student. No. My very daughter in the 3rd grade had mono, and she did terrible on the reading test in the 3rd grade. Well, I worked with a principal and said, you know, this isn't her real score, and she got some work. She'd never taken a standardized test before, and she did fine. She got a, you know, college degree, graduated with honors, and has a good job. But I just wonder if she'd been at a different school under different circumstances, if, you know, that could have ruined her life if they had said, well, you didn't do well on this 3rd grade reading test, so you know, you can't move on to 4th grade. She never would have gotten over that, you know. I still remember things that my 4th grade teacher did, you know, putting things on the wall that embarrassed people. I mean, those things are deep and they hurt, and I don't think these policymakers realize the real impact of their policies. You know, they can show bar graphs of right now the center. Let me start again. Okay, the Foundation for Excellence, which is Jeb Bush's education foundation. They are the prime policy makers of the state. They give a lot of the ideas to the legislature. They help handwrite the legislation of what should happen. People are generally afraid to speak up against them. At least that's what I found. And so they can show graphs and charts of minorities and poor kids raising their scores. And that may be true, because if that's all you teach all day long, I mean, the teachers know how to do that. They aren't measuring what is lost. And it doesn't seem to really hold over time. I mean, what they're showing right now is really high 4th grade reading scores. They brag about it a lot. Our 4th grade reading scores are the best, second best in the world. That's was quoted just the other day in the legislature, and the governor actually said that. Well, I've looked into that a little more deeply, and I looked up, well, Of course, your fourth grade reading scores are better. In the third grade, you held back all the poor readers, 57,000 of them. That'll make your fourth grade reading scores look mighty good. But then when you go and look at the eighth grade scores, they're just about flattened out. You don't see any big surge. And if that policy had worked, you'd see this huge surge in the scores. And they would hold by the eighth grade, but they really don't. Florida ranks, I think, right in the middle of the pack when it comes to eighth grade test scores. And we rank right now, I think it's, I'll have to look this up without saying it. I think we're in the 40s. I can give you the data on where we are on graduation rate. And I don't even think that's accurate at all.
Okay, then. Well, my last question to you would be, what do you think that they should do to help struggling kids and struggling parents that come from very tough backgrounds and stuff, to help them with their test scores, and to basically just make everybody just be one instead of just separating people because I know kids, they think they really don't know the whole story, but some kids might make fun of other kids because they've been held back and stuff like that. And that's how bullying gets caused later on.
Exactly.
So what do you think would be beneficial to help all students, all parents, all teachers?
Okay. Well, just so happens that I was the principal of a school that really has this model down very well, and has been very successful with a lot of kids who were disenfranchised from the regular schools. What you do is you create a community in a school where everyone in the school, the parents, the teachers, the principal, the custodian, the secretaries, they're all working together to create this rich learning environment that has art and music and dance and math and science, and they're all integrated together. And people complement your strengths. So if Sally is good at art, Sally gets showcased for her art. And if she's not so good at science, the kid who's good at science or the teacher who's good at science helps her out. So you create a cooperative environment where people aren't competing against each other. They're working together to help everyone learn the best they can. And now there's nothing wrong with doing some tests and seeing where kids' skills are lacking. And then you go in and you give them really good remediation with a qualified teacher that shows Johnny what he doesn't know in science and how to do it. And you do it in a way that's not threatening and doesn't have a hammer over someone's head. Because kids want to learn. Learning is a natural thing to do. Kids want to learn, they're curious, but they get scared. They get scared they're going to get a bad grade, or they get scared of something and they start shying away from it. Well, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at that. And I think that's the thing we have to break down, is everybody can be good at math and science and English. It just takes the right teacher, showing them the right way to do it in the right environment. And, I've seen it work. I know it works. So I'm not worried at all about the solution. We have the solution. We have a number of examples where kids who, like I say, who weren't doing well can do well. But the number one thing they say to me is, my teacher cares about me. That is like the number one ingredient to have a successful school, is that the parents and the kids all feel that the teacher cares about them personally and is out for their best interest. And they'll work so hard for a teacher who cares about them. I'm sure you had that experience. If you love your teacher, you will work hard. And so we need to reward loving, creative, caring teachers who know their business, know their subject, and pay them well, and not make teachers feel so disenfranchised. Right now, teachers are feeling very disenfranchised, and they're being judged by test scores over variables they don't really have control over. They can't control whether Sally comes to school or what kind of situation they're coming from that day or how they're going to do on the test that day. Yet, right now, their career hangs in the balance of that. So that's going to create stress for the teacher, which this teacher is going to just unknowingly pass it down to the student because they're worried that the student is going to feel it. And so we need to, my two main suggestions are get rid of school grades and get rid of teacher performance pay, because those are the two things right now that are really hurting schools. Now, there'd be a lot of pushback from this getting rid of school grades because for some reason people think they work. I was in the system. I was a principal for 32 years. Our school made an A. We worked hard at it because that's what meant we were a good school. But I saw some of the things we did that weren't good and weren't necessary, but we needed that school grade. So I think we should take that off the table and start evaluating schools in a different way.
Okay. Well, if there's any last minute things you want to say or anything, because those are my questions. So, I mean, is there anything else you want to elaborate on?
Not really.
Okay then.
And I've written a lot. You've got my blog.
Yes, I do.
And so I've got a whole piece on school grades, which you can refer to. I've got a piece on this teacher performance business, so you can quote me on anything, and my history and stuff's on my blog, my credentials.
Okay then.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Miss
All right.
Wood. We did